I was halfway through my coffee when my daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, smiled at her friends, and said, "Let's be honest, trash doesn't belong at a table like this." The laughter around me felt soft, almost polite, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. My son didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. I was just starting to stand ready to leave with whatever dignity I had left when the restaurant owner stepped out from the back. He saw me and everything about him changed. "Annie," he said, his voice breaking. Before anyone could react, he walked straight toward me and pulled me into a tight embrace. And just like that, my daughter-in-law went completely pale. If this moment already feels familiar in some way, being judged, dismissed, or made to feel small, I'd really love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself when people least expect it. My name is Annie Webb, and at 62, I've learned that loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from sitting at a table full of people who have already decided you don't belong. I wasn't always this quiet version of myself, the one who measures every word before speaking, who double-checks if she's dressed appropriately before stepping out the door, who wonders whether a simple gesture might be seen as embarrassing. That version of me came later, mostly after my husband Thomas passed away. We had been married for 36 years. Thomas was the kind of man who filled a room without ever raising his voice. Steady, warm, and deeply loyal. When he was alive, I never felt like I had to explain myself to anyone. He made our home feel like a place where being exactly who you were was more than enough. After he was gone, that feeling didn't disappear overnight, but it slowly unraveled. Especially after our son Michael married Chloe. Now I want to be fair. I truly do. When Michael first introduced Chloe to me, I honestly tried to see what he saw in her. She was polished, well-spoken, and carried herself with a kind of confidence I had never quite mastered. She worked in marketing, I think something to do with branding and corporate image. Everything about her seemed curated, even the way she smiled. At first, she was polite to me, distant but polite, the kind of politeness that keeps a careful amount of space between people. I told myself it was just nerves. Maybe she didn't know how to connect with me yet. But little things started to slip through. It was the way she would glance at my shoes when I visited, her eyes flicking down for just a second too long. The way she would correct me gently in front of others. "Oh, Annie, people don't really say it like that anymore," with a soft laugh that made it sound like a joke. The way she once took a sweater I had knitted for Michael, held it between two fingers and said, "It's very homemade." That word stayed with me longer than it should have. Homemade. Like it was something slightly embarrassing, something unfinished. After the wedding, things didn't get better, they just became more subtle, more refined. Chloe didn't insult me directly, not at first. She just adjusted things. Family dinners became less frequent. Holidays were suddenly complicated because of her side of the family. Invitations came later and later until sometimes they didn't come at all. And Michael, he changed too. Not all at once. It wasn't like he woke up one morning and decided to become someone else. It was slower than that. A missed phone call here, a rushed conversation there, a promise to visit that turned into a text message saying something had come up. Every time I told myself the same thing, "He's busy. He's building a life. Don't make this about you." But there's a particular kind of silence that starts to grow when you keep excusing someone you love, and over time that silence becomes distance. Still, I never stopped trying. I'd send birthday cards handwritten, of course. I'd bake things I knew he used to love. I'd call just to check in, even if the conversations were shorter than they used to be. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We keep showing up, even when the door isn't fully open anymore. So when Michael called me 2 weeks before that brunch, I remember being surprised. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice sounding lighter than usual. "We're planning a brunch to celebrate my promotion. Chloe's organizing it. We'd love for you to come." I remember holding the phone a little tighter. "We'd love for you to come." It had been a long time since anything sounded like that. "Oh," I said, trying not to let too much emotion slip into my voice. "That sounds lovely." Chloe got on the phone next. "Hi, Annie," she said, her tone smooth and pleasant. "We're doing it at this really beautiful place downtown. It's a bit upscale, but I think you'll enjoy it. Just something small with a few friends." "A few friends?" I hesitated for half a second. "Of course," I replied. "I wouldn't miss it." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the wall across from me. Something about the invitation felt different. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar. Chloe had never gone out of her way to include me in anything that involved her social circle before. If anything, she usually kept those parts of her life carefully separate. So why now, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe this was her way of reaching out. Maybe things were finally changing. Still, there were other small things that had been bothering me lately. Michael had been distracted during our last few conversations. Not distant in the usual way, but tense. Like he was carrying something he didn't want to talk about. A week before the brunch, I had asked him a simple question about some old paperwork documents that had come in the mail months ago, things related to my late husband's estate. At the time, I had been overwhelmed, and Michael had offered to take a look at them for me. It hadn't seemed like a big deal, but when I brought it up again, he brushed it off quickly. "Oh, that. It's nothing important, Mom. Just routine stuff. I'll handle it." Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't what he said, it was how quickly he wanted to move past it. And then there was Chloe. A few days after that conversation, she had called me out of the blue, which almost never happened. "Annie," she said warmly, "I just wanted to make sure you're still coming to brunch. I think it'll be really good for all of us to reconnect a bit. Reconnect." I smiled politely into the phone, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm looking forward to it," I said. But after we hung up, that same uneasy feeling returned, because people don't suddenly change their behavior without a reason. And whatever that reason was, I had a feeling I was about to find out. The morning of the brunch, I woke up earlier than I needed to. Old habits, I suppose. When something matters to you, sleep tends to slip away quietly, leaving your thoughts to fill the empty space. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, replaying the invitation in my head. The tone of Michael's voice, Chloe's carefully chosen words, the way she had said reconnect, as if we had ever truly been connected in the first place. Still, I wanted to believe this could be something good, that maybe, just maybe, this was a turning point. I got out of bed slowly and made myself a cup of tea, letting the warmth settle my nerves. My house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deeper with time. It used to feel peaceful. Lately it had started to feel hollow. After finishing my tea, I stood in front of my closet longer than I'd like to admit. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. At least that's what I told myself. But there's a difference between not trying to impress and not wanting to be dismissed. Eventually, I chose a soft blue dress. Simple. Clean. The kind of dress that didn't demand attention but still held its shape. I smoothed the fabric with my hands, checking for wrinkles that weren't there. Then I opened the small wooden jewelry box on my dresser. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. Thomas had given me those pearl earrings on our 20th anniversary. I remember how nervous he had been when he handed me the box, as if I might laugh at him for choosing something too simple. I had loved them immediately, not because they were expensive, they weren't, but because they were him, thoughtful, quiet, genuine. I fastened them carefully, catching my reflection in the mirror as I did. For a moment, I saw the woman I used to be. Then the moment passed. Before leaving, I picked up the card I had written for Michael. It wasn't much, just a handwritten note telling him how proud I was of him, how his father would have been proud too. I slipped it into my purse, hesitating for a second before closing the clasp. Chloe probably would have preferred something more impressive. A watch, a bottle of expensive wine, something that could be displayed. But that's never been how I show love. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The drive into downtown Savannah was familiar, but that morning everything felt sharper somehow. The sunlight, the traffic, even the sound of my own breath. It was as if my body knew something my mind hadn't fully accepted yet. The restaurant came into view sooner than I expected. It was beautiful. Tall windows, soft cream-colored walls, and a sign that looked both elegant and effortless at the same time. The kind of place that didn't need to prove anything because it already knew what it was. I parked a little farther down the street than I probably needed to, taking a moment before stepping out of the car. "You're just going to brunch," I whispered to myself. "It's not a test." But it felt like one. When I walked inside, the atmosphere wrapped around me immediately: low conversation, soft clinking of glassware, the quiet hum of a place where people expected to be seen. I spotted Michael first. He was standing near the table, adjusting his jacket, his posture just slightly too stiff. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who would run to me after school, talking a mile a minute about his day. "Mom?" he said when he saw me, offering a quick smile. Not cold, not warm either, just careful. "You look nice," he added. "Thank you," I replied, trying to hold on to that small kindness. Then Chloe turned. "Annie," she said brightly, stepping forward just enough to make it look like a welcome. "You made it." Her eyes moved over me in a quick practice sweep from my dress to my shoes to the pearls at my ears. There it was, that pause, that silent assessment. "It's a lovely place," I said. "It is," she replied. "We come here often." "Of course you do," I thought but didn't say. She gestured toward the table. "A few friends," she had said. There were 8 people already seated. Well-dressed, polished, the kind of group that knew how to laugh at the right moments and keep their voices at just the right volume. Conversations paused briefly as I approached, eyes flicking toward me with polite curiosity. "This is Annie Michael's mom," Chloe announced. "Not my mother-in-law, not family, just Annie." I smiled and nodded, offering quiet greetings as I took the seat Chloe indicated at the far end of the table, not beside Michael, not even near him, at the end, like an afterthought. Menus were handed around, and the conversation picked up again, flowing easily between people who clearly knew each other well. Vacations, investments, someone's upcoming event. Words that sounded effortless in their mouths, as if they had always belonged to that world. I stayed quiet, scanning the menu. There were things I recognized and things I didn't. Names that sounded familiar but slightly different, like they belonged to a version of life just out of reach. "What are you thinking of getting?" one of Chloe's friends asked me suddenly. Her tone was polite, but there was something behind it. Curiosity, maybe. "Oh," I said, glancing down. "I'm not sure yet." Chloe leaned in just slightly. "You might want to keep it simple," she said lightly. "Some of the dishes here can be a bit much if you're not used to them." A small laugh followed. Not loud, not cruel, just enough. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. The server came by and everyone began placing their orders. When it was my turn, I chose something straightforward: an omelet and coffee. Safe. Familiar. Classic, Chloe murmured just loud enough for the table to hear. More laughter. I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap, but I kept my expression steady. It wasn't the first time. It probably wouldn't be the last. But something about that morning felt different, sharper, like every word was being placed carefully, building towards something I couldn't quite see yet. As the conversation continued, Chloe began to shift the focus. "So, Annie," she said, turning toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I was just telling everyone how unique your perspective on things is." I looked up. "Oh yes," she continued. "Michael says you still prefer doing everything the old-fashioned way. Handwritten notes, cooking from scratch. All of that." Her friends smiled politely. "It sounds very nostalgic," one of them added. "Or outdated," another said, half joking. Chloe laughed softly. "Well," she said, "there's something charming about it, in a vintage way." There it was again. That word. That tone. Carefully wrapped judgment dressed up as praise. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, I heard Chloe say something else. Quietly. Almost to herself. "Anyway," she added, "lifting her glass today, we finally get everything handled." My heart skipped. I wasn't supposed to hear that. Or maybe I was. Either way, I knew one thing in that moment. This brunch wasn't about celebration. It was about something else entirely, and whatever it was, I was sitting right in the middle of it. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that the tone in Chloe's voice, the careful way her friends kept circling back to me, the small pointed comments, they were just awkward attempts at conversation. That maybe I was reading too much into it because I already felt out of place. But the longer I sat there, the harder it became to ignore. The conversation began to shift more directly toward me, like a spotlight slowly narrowing. "So, Annie," one of the women across from me said, smiling in that practiced, polished way, "what did you do before you retired?" There it was again. That assumption. "I didn't really retire," I said gently. "I worked part-time at a local bookstore for years. Before that, I helped manage things at home. My husband traveled often, so—" "Oh, that's sweet," she interrupted. "Very traditional." Chloe tilted her head slightly. "Michael always says you kept things simple," she added. Simple. Another word that sounded harmless on the surface but carried something heavier underneath. "I suppose I did," I replied. "And you still live in the same house?" someone else asked. "Yes, the one outside the city," Chloe chimed in quickly. "It's very quiet out there." Too quiet, her tone implied. Too small. Too removed from everything that mattered. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but I kept my posture straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I had spent years learning how to sit through discomfort without letting it show. The food arrived shortly after, giving me something to focus on other than the growing tension around me. For a few minutes, things settled. People ate. Conversations broke into smaller clusters. Glasses clinked softly. I allowed myself a breath. Maybe this was it. Maybe the worst had already passed. But then Chloe leaned back in her chair, dabbing the corner of her mouth with her napkin in a slow, deliberate motion. "You know," she said, her voice light but carrying just enough to draw attention, It's always interesting to see how different backgrounds shape people. The table quieted slightly. I felt it before I understood it. That shift. That subtle turning of attention back toward me. Chloe smiled not at me, but at her friends. I mean, some people just never really grow out of where they started, she continued. A few polite chuckles followed. Michael shifted in his seat. Chloe, he said quietly, but without conviction. She waved a hand as if brushing away something insignificant. Oh, relax. I'm just talking in general. But she wasn't. We all knew she wasn't. She turned toward me, then her eyes locking onto mine with a softness that felt rehearsed. Annie, you don't mind, do you? She asked. I mean, you've always been very open about your upbringing. There it was. No more subtlety, no more disguise. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I forced myself to remain still. I've never been ashamed of where I come from, I said quietly. Chloe's smile widened. That's good, she replied, because not everyone gets the chance to move beyond it. The words landed heavier this time, sharper, deliberate. I glanced at Michael. He was staring down at his plate, his fork moving food around without actually eating it. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening. And he was letting it happen anyway. Something inside me shifted then. Not anger, not yet, but something close to it. A quiet realization. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't awkwardness. This was intentional. Chloe leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table in a way that somehow felt both casual and confrontational at the same time. You know what I think she said? No one answered. She didn't wait for them to. I think people should stay where they belong, she continued. It just makes everything cleaner. The word hung in the air. Cleaner. As if people like me were something that needed to be managed, contained. I placed my fork down carefully. Chloe. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. She tilted her head, studying me. For a brief second, I thought she might pull back, that maybe she would realize she had gone too far, but instead she smiled. Slowly. Oh, I think you understand perfectly, she said. The table had gone completely quiet now. Even her friends weren't laughing anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was something else, something sharper, more uncomfortable, more real. Chloe leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with a kind of effortless elegance. Let's be honest, she said, her voice dropping just enough to feel intimate and cutting. Trash doesn't belong at a table like this. There it was. No soft edges, no disguise. Just the truth, at least her version of it. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The word echoed in my mind louder than the room around me. Trash. Not outdated, not simple, not traditional. Trash. I could feel every pair of eyes on me now, waiting, watching, judging. My hands rested in my lap, fingers curled slightly inward as if trying to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. I had spent years making excuses, years telling myself Chloe didn't mean it, that Michael was just busy, that things would get better if I was patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough. But in that moment, something became painfully clear. It didn't matter how patient I was. It didn't matter how kind. Because to her, I had already been defined, reduced, dismissed. I slowly pushed my chair back. The sound against the floor felt louder than it should have. I think I should go, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. No one stopped me. Not immediately. Michael finally looked up, his expression flickering with something that might have been guilt, but it came too late. "Mom," he started. But the word felt hollow, incomplete. I picked up my purse, my movements careful, deliberate. If I was going to leave, I was going to leave with whatever dignity I still had. I didn't look at Chloe again. I didn't trust myself to. But just as I turned, I heard movement from the far side of the room, a door opening, footsteps. At first I didn't think anything of it, but then I heard a voice, strong, clear, and suddenly very close. "Excuse me." The room shifted. I felt it before I fully turned around. That subtle change in energy, like something unexpected had entered the space. I looked up, and that's when I saw him, the owner, standing just a few steps away, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. And in that instant, everything about his expression changed. For a second, I thought I was mistaken. People don't usually look at you like that, not after 30 years, not across a crowded room filled with strangers and quiet judgment. There was something in his face that didn't belong to the present moment. Recognition, yes, but more than that. Something deeper. Something that reached past time itself and landed directly in my chest. He took a step closer. "Annie," he said. My name didn't sound like my name in his voice. It sounded remembered. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, trying to place the lines on his face the way his hair had thinned at the temples, the familiar shape of his eyes that I hadn't seen in decades and yet somehow recognized instantly. And then it clicked. "Tony," I whispered. The moment the name left my lips, everything shifted. His expression broke open completely, like something he had been holding back for years had finally been given permission to surface. "Annie girl," he said, his voice softening as he closed the distance between us. Before I could react, before I could think about where I was or who was watching, he wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't a polite embrace. It wasn't the kind of hug you give out of courtesy or obligation. It was real. Firm, warm, unapologetic. I felt his hand press gently against the back of my shoulder, steadying me in a way that made something inside me loosen unexpectedly. And just like that, the room disappeared. For a moment, I wasn't standing in an upscale restaurant surrounded by people who had just watched me be humiliated. I was back in a different time, a smaller place. A louder place. A kitchen filled with heat and movement and voices calling out orders, laughter echoing between narrow walls, the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. A life I hadn't thought about in years. When he pulled back, his hands stayed on my shoulders as if he needed to be sure I was real. "I can't believe this," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I've been trying to find you." My heart skipped. "You have?" I asked, still trying to steady myself. "For months," he replied. "Longer, actually. I just didn't know where to look anymore." Behind me, I could feel the shift at the table. Silence, confusion, and something else. I didn't need to turn around to know Chloe was watching, but I did anyway. She was frozen. Completely still, her hand wrapped loosely around her glass, her posture rigid in a way that didn't match her usual effortless control. Her face had lost color, not the kind of pale that comes from surprise, the kind that comes from something deeper, something unsettled. Michael looked just as stunned, his gaze moving between me and Tony, as if he were trying to make sense of a version of me he had never seen before. Tony followed my glance, then looked back at me. "Are these your people?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "My people." I hesitated. Before I could answer, Chloe stood up slightly, her smile snapping back into place like a mask being pulled over something cracked beneath. "Yes," she said quickly. "We were just finishing up. I'm Chloe Michael's wife." She extended her hand. Tony didn't take it. Not immediately. He looked at her, his expression polite but distant, measured. Then he nodded once briefly before turning his attention back to me.
"I didn't know you were coming in today,"
he said.
"If I had known—"
His voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't just any customer interaction. This was something personal. "I didn't know you were here," I replied softly.
"I've been here a while now," he said. "Opened this place about 10 years ago. Before that, I moved around a bit. Tried a few different things."
He paused, his gaze searching mine.
"But I never forgot you."
The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true. I felt something tighten in my throat, but I swallowed it down. There were too many eyes on us, too many questions hanging in the air. Behind us, I heard one of Chloe's friends whisper something under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. The entire dynamic of the table had changed. The woman who had been dismissed just minutes ago, the one who didn't belong, who had been quietly categorized and reduced, was now standing at the center of something none of them understood. And Chloe, she knew it. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just her surprise, but the fear underneath it. Subtle, controlled, but there. Tony glanced toward the table again, then back at me.
"Would you mind stepping into my office for a minute?"
he asked gently.
"There's something I need to talk to you about. Something important."
My heart beat a little faster.
"Important."
I looked at Michael. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Chloe stepped in instead. "Oh, we can all come," she said quickly. "If it's something important for Annie, we should."
"No,"
Tony said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Clear. "This is something I need to discuss with Annie privately." The shift in authority was immediate. Chloe blinked, clearly not used to being shut down so directly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I turned back to Tony and nodded. "Of course," I said. As I reached for my purse, I became aware of something else. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The humiliation from earlier, the sting of Chloe's words, the weight of that moment, it hadn't disappeared. But it had been interrupted, redirected, and now something else was taking its place. Curiosity, caution, and a quiet growing awareness that whatever was about to happen next, it was bigger than brunch. I followed Tony across the restaurant, past tables and conversations that resumed in low murmurs behind us. I didn't look back. Not at Chloe, not at Michael. I didn't need to, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one being watched with quiet judgment. They were, and whatever Chloe thought she had under control that morning, it was already starting to slip. Tony's office was smaller than I expected. For a place so polished and expansive, the back room felt almost personal. Warm lighting, a worn wooden desk, framed photographs on the wall that told pieces of a life I hadn't been part of for a very long time. He closed the door gently behind us, shutting out the noise of the restaurant. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, really looked this time. Not as strangers reconnecting, but as people trying to reconcile the present with everything that had come before. "You haven't changed as much as you think," he said. Finally, a faint smile touching his lips. I let out a quiet breath. "That's not what I see in the mirror these days," I replied. He shook his head. "You always did underestimate yourself." The words hit closer than I expected.
because they were true. I moved slowly toward one of the chairs and sat down, placing my purse carefully on my lap. My fingers rested against the clasp as if I needed something steady to hold on to. Tony didn't sit right away. He walked behind his desk, then stopped halfway like he couldn't quite commit to the distance it created. Instead, he leaned against the edge, arms loosely crossed.
"I didn't think I'd ever see you again," he said.
"Neither did I admitted, and for a brief moment the years between us didn't feel like distance. They felt like something unfinished.
"You disappeared,"
he said gently, not accusing, just stating a fact.
"I had to,"
I replied. My mother got sick. Everything happened so fast. There wasn't time to explain things properly. "I know," he said. "I heard eventually. But by then you were already gone." There was a quiet weight in his voice. Not bitterness, just something unresolved. "I got married," I added softly. "Thomas? He was a good man." Tony nodded.
"I figured as much," he said. "You always chose the steady kind." "And you?" I asked. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I chose the complicated kind," he said lightly. "For a while." Something in his tone told me there was more to that story, but I didn't press. We had both lived entire lives in the time we hadn't known each other. Not everything needed to be unpacked at once. A silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. Then his expression shifted. The softness gave way to something more serious. "That's not the only reason I asked you back here," he said.
I felt it immediately. That change in energy. The shift from past to present. "I figured," I replied. He pushed himself off the desk and walked over to a drawer, pulling out a thick envelope. The paper inside looked worn, like it had been handled more than once.
"I've been holding on to this,"
he said, placing it carefully on the desk in front of me, because I wasn't sure what to do with it. I stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front. Not in his handwriting.
"This came to the restaurant about 3 weeks ago," he continued. "Addressed to you. It only ended up here because, well, a long time ago, your name was tied to an old contact record connected to my family's business. Whoever sent it must have used outdated information."
I reached out slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper. It felt heavier than it should have.
"I didn't open it,"
he added quickly.
"I wasn't sure if I should, but when I saw the name, I knew it had to be you."
"Thank you," I said quietly. I opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a stack of documents. At first, they didn't make much sense. Legal language, numbers, names I didn't immediately recognize. But then, I saw his name, Thomas Webb. My breath caught. "What is this?" I whispered. Tony stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly.
"That's what I was hoping you could tell me," he said, "but from what I've been able to gather, it looks like some kind of dormant investment, something your husband was involved in years ago."
I flipped through the pages, my hands moving a little faster now.
"I've never seen this before," I said. "You sure?" he asked.
I nodded. If Thomas had something like this, he would have told me. Wouldn't he? The question lingered in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. Tony leaned over slightly, pointing to a section near the middle.
"Look here," he said. "There are records of recent inquiries."
I followed his finger.
"Dates. Within the last few months.
Someone's been trying to access information about this account," he continued.
"Not successfully, but they've been asking the right questions."
A chill ran through me.
"Who?" I asked.
He shook his head.
"It doesn't say.
Just that the inquiries came through legal channels. Someone with enough information to know what they were looking for." I sat back in the chair, the documents resting heavily in my hands. For a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, as if everything had narrowed down to this one realization. Someone knew about this. Someone had been looking into it. And I hadn't known anything at all. I trusted Michael with some of Thomas's paperwork after he passed, I said slowly. There were things I didn't understand at the time, things I thought were routine. Tony didn't interrupt. He just listened. I never followed up, I continued. I assumed if it was important he would tell me. The words felt heavier as I said them out loud. Because now, I wasn't so sure. Tony's expression softened slightly. "Annie," he said carefully, "I'm not saying anything's wrong, but if someone's been asking questions about this, you need to be careful." Careful. The word echoed in my mind. Not afraid, not reactive. Careful. I looked back down at the documents, scanning them again more slowly this time. That's when I noticed it. A break in the sequence. A missing page. At first I thought I had skipped something, but when I checked again, it was clear. There was a gap. Was a section that should have been there. Wasn't. "Tony," I said quietly. He leaned in. "What is it?" "There's something missing." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I pointed to the numbering. "It jumps," I explained. "This section there should be another page here. Something that explains ownership structure or beneficiary rights." He straightened. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said. "I may not understand all the legal language, but I know how documents are organized." A silence fell between us again. But this time it wasn't about the past. It was about something unfolding in the present. Something that no longer felt distant or theoretical. It felt close, personal, deliberate. And suddenly Chloe's voice from earlier that morning echoed in my head. "Today we finally get everything handled." My grip tightened slightly on the papers, because now I was starting to understand what she meant. For a long moment, I just stared at the gap where that missing page should have been. It wasn't just a clerical mistake. You can feel the difference even if you don't speak the language of contracts and clauses. There's a rhythm to documents like these sections that flow into each other, each part building on the last. And when something is removed, it leaves behind more than empty space. It leaves intention. "Tony," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady, "this isn't an accident." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from me and finally sat down, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "Walk me through it," he said. I took a breath and flipped back a few pages, tracing the structure with my finger. This section outlines the original investment I explained. Then it moves into the partnership terms, then responsibilities timelines, and then it jumps. I tapped the page. "Right here. There should be something about current control. Ownership. Who has the authority to make decisions now that my husband is gone?" Tony's jaw tightened slightly. "And that's the part that's missing." "Yes." The words sat heavily between us. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Which means someone didn't just look at these papers," he said. "They knew exactly what to take." I nodded, and for the first time since opening that envelope, a deeper unease settled into my chest. Not confusion, not even shock. Something sharper. Because this wasn't about discovering something new. This was about realizing something had already been happening without me. "I need to ask you something," Tony said carefully. I looked up. "Of course." "Has anyone else had access to your mail? Your documents? Anything related to your husband's estate?" The question didn't catch me off guard. "Not anymore." I lowered my eyes briefly, thinking back. "Yes," I said. "Michael." Tony didn't react outwardly, but I saw the slight shift in his expression. After Thomas passed, there were a lot of things I didn't understand. I continued. Legal papers, financial documents. It was overwhelming. Michael offered to help. He said he'd go through everything, make sure nothing important was missed. And you trusted him. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said softly. "He's my son." The words felt different now. Not untrue, but incomplete. Tony nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. "But Annie, if someone's been making inquiries about this investment recently and there's a missing page, those two things aren't separate. I knew that. I had known it the moment I saw the gap. But hearing it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I don't want to jump to conclusions, I said more to myself than to him. "Of course not," he replied. "But you also don't want to ignore what's right in front of you." Silence settled again. Not heavy, just honest. I gathered the documents carefully, placing them back into the envelope, but I didn't seal it. My fingers rested on the edge for a moment as if I needed to feel something solid. "I need to think," I said. Tony nodded. "Take your time." I stood up slowly, my mind already moving ahead, trying to connect pieces that hadn't made sense before. Michael's distracted tone, the way he brushed off my questions about the paperwork, Chloe's sudden interest in reconnecting, the brunch, the audience, the timing, it all lined up too neatly, too intentionally. Annie Tony said gently before I reached the door. I turned. "If you need help, real help, don't try to handle this alone," he said. "There are people who know how to navigate things like this properly." I know I replied, and I think I might need that. He gave a small nod. "And whatever this turns out to be," he added, "just remember you're not the same person they think you are." A faint, almost tired smile crossed my face. "No," I said quietly. I'm starting to realize that. When I stepped back into the restaurant, the atmosphere felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, the same tables, the same soft conversations, the same clinking glasses, but because I had. Awareness does that. It shifts the way everything looks. I walked back toward the table slowly, the envelope tucked securely in my purse. They were all still there, waiting, watching. Chloe's posture was composed, but there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Michael looked unsettled. Not panicked, not yet, but definitely not at ease. "Well," Chloe said lightly as I approached. "Everything okay?" Her tone was casual. Too casual. I took my seat again, placing my purse gently on my lap. "Tony had some documents that were meant for me," I said evenly. Her expression didn't change immediately, but something flickered. "Documents," she repeated. "Yes." I let the word sit for a moment. Then I added, "related to my late husband." That was when it happened. It was subtle. So subtle that anyone who wasn't looking directly at her might have missed it. But I saw it. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Just slightly. Just enough. Michael shifted in his seat. "What kind of documents?" he asked. His voice sounded normal, but there was something underneath it. Something strained. "I'm still going through them," I replied. "It looks like there may have been an investment I wasn't fully aware of." The table went quiet again. Not the same kind of silence as before. This one was different, focused, intent. An investment, Chloe said, her smile returning but thinner now. "That sounds complicated." It might be, I said. I met her gaze directly. For the first time that morning, I didn't look away. But I'll be speaking to someone who can help me understand it properly. Her eyes narrowed just for a fraction of a second. Someone, she asked. Yes, I said calmly. An attorney. That word landed exactly where I wanted it to. I saw it in the way her posture stiffened, in the way her expression tightened before she could smooth it out again. Oh, she said lightly. Well, that seems a bit extreme, don't you think? I mean, Michael works in finance. He could easily help you sort through something like that. There it was. The pivot. The attempt to redirect control. I shook my head gently. I think it's better to have someone independent take a look, I said, just to be sure everything's handled correctly. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't argue. But he didn't support me either, and that told me more than anything else. Chloe leaned back in her chair, her smile returning fully now, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, she said. Whatever makes you comfortable. Comfortable. The word almost made me laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I picked up my coffee and took a small sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Because something had changed. Not just in the room. In me. I wasn't sitting there trying to prove I belonged anymore. I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't shrinking to fit into a space that had already decided I was too much or not enough. I was observing, listening, and for the first time, I was paying attention to the things people didn't say. Because whatever Chloe had planned for that morning, it hadn't gone the way she expected. And whatever came next, I was going to be ready for it. The rest of brunch unfolded in a way that would have seemed ordinary to anyone else. Plates were cleared. Coffee was refilled. Conversations resumed cautiously at first, then with more confidence as people sensed the tension had shifted away from open conflict. Chloe even laughed again, light practiced, effortless on the surface. But I saw it now. All of it. Once you stop trying to belong, you start noticing things you were too careful to see before. Chloe wasn't relaxed. She was recalculating. Every glance she sent my way was measured. Every word was placed deliberately as if she were adjusting to a version of me she hadn't prepared for. The easy confidence she had carried earlier when she believed I would sit quietly and absorb whatever she threw at me had been replaced with something sharper. Controlled. Michael, on the other hand, was unraveling in smaller ways. He barely touched his food. His responses to his friends came half a second too late. And every time I spoke, even something simple, his eyes flicked toward me, like he was trying to read something in my face that he couldn't quite understand anymore. Good, I thought quietly. Let him wonder. When the bill came, Chloe insisted on handling it, of course. Our treat, she said brightly, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just called me trash less than an hour ago. I didn't argue. Not because I accepted the gesture, but because I was done playing the role she had written for me. We stood to leave, chairs scraping lightly against the floor. Annie Chloe said, her voice smooth again. Why don't you come by later this week? We could sit down, go through those documents together, make things easier for you. There it was, the offer, wrapped in concern, presented as help. But now I knew what it was. Access. Control. I adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. I appreciate that, I said calmly, but I've already made arrangements. Her smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Subtle. Tighter. Oh, she said. Yes, I'll be meeting with an attorney. There it was again, that flicker. Quick. Sharp. Gone almost immediately. Of course, she replied, if that's what you're more comfortable with. Comfortable. That word again. I gave a small nod, then turned to Michael. "It was nice seeing you," I said. "It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth." He looked at me for a moment, something unreadable passing through his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You too, Mom." Mom. He hadn't said that much during the meal. The word felt unfamiliar in his mouth, as if he had forgotten how to use it properly. I didn't push him. Not yet. Because pushing too soon would only give them time to prepare, and right now I needed them exactly where they were, uncertain. Off balance, I left the restaurant without looking back. The air outside felt different, cooler, cleaner. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the noise of the street settle around me. Cars passing, people talking. The distant hum of a city moving forward, unaware of the quiet shift that had just taken place inside me. I reached into my purse and touched the edge of the envelope again. It was real. All of it. The missing page. The recent inquiries. The look on Chloe's face when I mentioned an attorney. None of it was coincidence. I walked to my car slowly, my thoughts moving faster with every step. By the time I sat down in the driver's seat, one thing had become clear. I couldn't go into this blindly, not anymore. I needed someone who understood the language of these documents, someone who wasn't connected to Michael, someone who would look at the situation without emotion and tell me exactly what I was dealing with. Tony had been right. I couldn't handle this alone. I started the engine, but instead of heading home, I pulled out my phone. There was one name I remembered from years ago, someone a friend from church had mentioned after dealing with an estate issue. Rachel Bennett. At the time, I hadn't needed her. Now, I did. I hesitated for a second, my thumb hovering over the screen. This was the moment I realized. The point where I either stayed the same or stepped into something different. Not louder, not harsher. Just clearer. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Law Office of Rachel Bennett." "Hello?" I said, steadying my voice. "My name is Annie Webb. I was hoping to schedule a consultation regarding some estate documents." Of course, the voice replied. "We can help with that. What seems to be the issue?" I glanced down at the envelope in my lap. "There are documents connected to my late husband," I said. "An investment I wasn't aware of, and I believe someone may have already attempted to access it." There was a brief pause on the other end. "All right," the voice said, more focused now. "We should definitely take a look at that. When are you available?" "As soon as possible," I replied. We scheduled an appointment for the following morning. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I expected to feel overwhelmed, afraid, but instead, I felt something else. Clarity. For years, I had been reacting, adjusting, trying to keep peace in a space that was never truly mine. But this was different. This wasn't about fitting in. This was about understanding what had been hidden from me and deciding what to do with it. I started the car and pulled out into traffic, my grip on the wheel steady. As I drove, memories began to surface, small things I had overlooked before. Conversations that ended too quickly. Questions Michael had deflected. The way Chloe always seemed just a little too interested when money or property came up in passing. At the time, I had brushed it off. Because that's what you do when you want to believe the best in people. But belief, I was learning, doesn't change reality. And reality was starting to come into focus. By the time I reached home, the sun had shifted higher in the sky, casting light across the front porch. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a soft click. The house was quiet, just as it had been that morning. But it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel hollow. It felt steady. I walked to the kitchen table and placed the envelope down in front of me. For a long moment, I just looked at it. Then I opened it again, pulling out the documents and laying them flat, page by page, line by line. Even without fully understanding everything, I could see it now. The structure, the intent, the value, and the absence. That missing page wasn't just information, it was control, authority, power. And someone had taken it, not randomly, not carelessly, deliberately. My fingers rested on the edge of the paper as a quiet realization settled over me. Chloe hadn't invited me to brunch out of kindness. She hadn't tried to reconnect. She hadn't suddenly decided to accept me. She had been setting the stage, creating a moment where I would feel small, grateful, dependent. The kind of moment where I might sign something without asking too many questions. The kind of moment where trash might be convinced it didn't deserve to hold on to anything valuable. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For years, I had allowed her to define the space between us, to decide what I was worth, what I deserved, what I should accept. But not anymore, because whatever she thought she understood about me, she had underestimated the one thing that mattered most. I wasn't afraid of starting over, and I wasn't afraid of standing alone. If anything, that was where I had always been strongest. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same things replaying in quiet loops. Chloe's smile as she said trash. Michael looking down at his plate, the missing page, the way Chloe's fingers tightened when I mentioned an attorney. But underneath all of that, something else had taken hold. Awareness. Once you start seeing patterns, it becomes impossible to unsee them. By the time morning came, I was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, the documents spread out in front of me again. I wasn't trying to decode every legal term I knew. That wasn't my strength, but I was studying structure, where things connected, where they didn't, and most importantly, where something had been removed. At exactly 9 o'clock, I gathered everything carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and headed out. Rachel Bennett's office was in a modest brick building just off the main street, not flashy, not intimidating, but solid. The kind of place that didn't rely on appearance to establish credibility. I liked that immediately. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A receptionist greeted me with a warm but professional smile. "Ms. Webb, Rachel is expecting you." I nodded and followed her down a short hallway into a quiet office. Rachel Bennett stood as I entered. She was in her mid-40s, composed with a kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. Her handshake was firm, her gaze steady, not curious, not judgmental. Grounded. "Annie," she said, "please have a seat." I sat down, placing the envelope on her desk. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said. "Of course," she replied. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" I took a breath and began. I told her about the envelope arriving at the restaurant, about Tony recognizing my name, about the documents, the investment, and the missing page. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I just laid it out piece by piece. Rachel didn't interrupt. She listened. Really listened. By the time I finished, the room felt still, not tense, just focused. "All right," she said finally. "Let's take a look." She opened the envelope and began reviewing the documents carefully. Not quickly, not casually, line by line. I watched her face as she worked, looking for any shift, any sign that something stood out to her the way it had to me. It didn't take long. About 10 minutes in, she paused. Her finger rested on the same section I had noticed. "This is incomplete," she said. I felt a quiet confirmation settle in my chest. Yes, I replied. That's what I thought. She flipped back a page, then forward again, studying the structure. There should absolutely be a controlling interest clause here, she continued. Something outlining who currently holds authority over the investment. Without it, this document is intentionally limited. Limited how I asked. She looked up at me. In a way that makes it harder for you to assert control, she said plainly. The words didn't shock me, but hearing them from someone who understood exactly what she was looking at made them heavier. And the inquiries I asked? Tony said someone had been asking about the account recently. Rachel nodded. That's consistent with what I'm seeing, she said. Whoever made those inquiries knew enough to ask the right questions, but not enough to access the account fully. Because of the missing page. Exactly. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then she leaned back slightly, folding her hands. Annie, I'm going to ask you something directly, she said. Has anyone close to you had access to your husband's paperwork in the past? I didn't hesitate. Yes. My son. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Tell me more, she said. I explained again how after Thomas passed, I had been overwhelmed. How Michael had stepped in to help organize documents, review mail, and handle things I didn't fully understand at the time. Rachel listened carefully, and recently she asked, any unusual behavior? Avoidance pressure, I thought back. Michael brushing off my questions. Chloe's sudden invitation. The brunch. The timing. Yes, I said quietly. There's been a change. Rachel nodded slowly. I'm not making accusations, she said, but based on what I'm seeing, it's very possible that someone with access to your documents removed that page intentionally and has been trying to position themselves to gain control of the asset. The words were calm, measured, but they landed with precision. And if I had signed something I asked. Her gaze met mine directly. If you had signed the wrong document, she said you could have unknowingly transferred control, or at least significant authority away from yourself. A quiet chill moved through me. Not fear, recognition. Because now the pieces weren't just aligning, they were locking into place. Chloe wanted me to come over later this week, I said slowly, to go through documents together. Rachel's eyes sharpened slightly. Did she present anything to you already? Not yet, I replied, but she offered. That's important, Rachel said. It suggests they were planning to formalize something soon. The word didn't go unnoticed. Michael, I asked. Rachel paused. I don't know his level of involvement, she said carefully. But I can say this, situations like this rarely happen without some level of awareness from the person closest to the asset holder. I looked down at my hands. For a moment, the room felt quieter. He didn't have to plan it. He didn't have to lead it. He just had to not stop it. And sometimes, that's enough. What do I do now? I asked. Rachel leaned forward slightly. First, we secure everything she said. We make sure no one can access or alter any part of this investment without your explicit authorization. I nodded. Second, we trace the inquiries, she continued. Find out who made them, through what channels, and with what authority. And third, she held my gaze. We prepare for the possibility of confrontation. The word hung in the air. Confrontation. Not avoidance. Not quiet endurance. Something direct. Something final. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to destroy my relationship with my son, I said. Rachel's expression softened slightly. You're not the one who put it at risk, she replied. That landed deeper than I expected. Because it was true. I'll handle the legal side, she continued. But Annie, when this comes to the surface, it's going to require something from you too. What I asked. Clarity, she said, about what you're willing to accept and what you're not. I nodded, because that part I already knew. As I left her office later that morning, the world outside felt sharper again, but this time not overwhelming, focused, defined. I wasn't walking in uncertainty anymore. I was walking with information, and that changes everything. Because whatever Chloe thought she was building behind the scenes, whatever Michael thought he could quietly allow without consequence, they had both made the same mistake. They had assumed I wouldn't look closely. They had assumed I wouldn't question. They had assumed I would stay small. But now, I wasn't just aware of what they were trying to do. I was ready to stop it. By the time I got home from Rachel's office, the quiet in my house no longer felt hollow. It felt intentional. For the first time in years, I wasn't filling silence with excuses. I was using it to think. I placed the documents on the kitchen table again, but this time I didn't feel the same uncertainty I had the night before. Rachel had given structure to what I was seeing, context, language, clarity. The missing page wasn't just suspicious, it was strategic. And more importantly, it was reversible. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down staring at the sunlight stretching across the table. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. Chloe. Of course, I let it ring once more before answering. Hello, Annie, she said, her voice smooth and bright as if yesterday had never happened. I was just thinking about you. I wanted to check in, see how you were feeling after brunch. I almost smiled. Feeling. That word again. I'm doing fine, I replied calmly. Good, she said quickly. I was a little worried things might have felt tense. You know how these gatherings can be. Yes, I thought. I know exactly how you make them. But I didn't say that. I understand, I said instead. There was a brief pause. Then she moved in. I was also thinking, she continued, it might be a good idea for us to sit down together, just you, me, and Michael, and go through any paperwork you received. That way we can make sure everything's handled correctly. Handled. There it was again, the word she had used yesterday, the word that had meant something very different before. I appreciate the offer, I said, keeping my tone even, but I've already started reviewing things with an attorney. Silence. Not long, but enough. Oh, she said lightly. You moved quickly. I thought it was important. Of course, she replied. I wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed by legal language. Sometimes attorneys can complicate things unnecessarily. I leaned back in my chair. Or clarify them, I said. Another pause. This one, tighter. Well, she said, her voice shifting just slightly. Michael and I have experience with financial matters. It might be more efficient if I'm comfortable with the direction I'm taking, I said gently but firmly. There it was. The boundary. Clear. Unapologetic. I could almost feel her recalculating on the other end of the line. Then just as quickly as the tension rose, she smoothed it over. Of course, she said again, her tone returning to that polished ease. Whatever makes you feel secure. Secure. Not comfortable. Not supported. Secure. She was choosing her words more carefully now, because she knew. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough. Michael is here, actually, she added. Would you like to speak with him? Before I could answer, I heard a slight shuffle. Then his voice. Mom! I closed my eyes for a brief moment before responding. Yes. You okay? He asked. The question sounded simple, but there was something underneath it, something uncertain. I'm fine, I said, about everything, he added. I let the silence stretch for a second longer than necessary. I'm handling it, I replied. Another pause. Mom, if this is about those documents. It is, I said. He stopped. I just think, he continued carefully, it might be easier if we go through it together. You don't need to involve outside people right away. Outside people? I almost laughed. You're not outside people, I said quietly. He didn't respond. Michael. I continued, my voice steady. When I asked you about those papers before, you said they were nothing important. He exhaled softly. I didn't think they were, he said. Or you didn't want me to think they were, I asked. The question landed. He didn't answer immediately. Mom, I'm not accusing you of anything I said, but I'm not going to move forward blindly either. Another silence. He sounded different when he spoke again, less certain. Okay, he said. I understand, but I wasn't sure he did, because understanding requires more than agreement. It requires honesty, and I wasn't sure we were there yet. I'll keep you updated, I added. All right, he replied. The conversation ended shortly after that. No argument, no resolution, just space. I set the phone down and stared at it for a moment. Then I exhaled slowly. That had been the first real shift. Not the brunch, not the documents. This, the moment where I stopped deferring, stopped softening, stopped pretending I didn't see what was happening. And Chloe had felt it. I knew she had, because people like her don't react to emotion. They react to control. And for the first time, she wasn't holding it. That evening, I sat down with the documents again, this time making notes the way Rachel had suggested. Dates, names, inconsistencies, patterns. I wasn't trying to outthink them. I was trying to understand the shape of what they had built. And slowly, it began to form. The missing page wasn't just about control, it was about timing. If they could get me to sign something before I realized what the investment truly was, before I understood its value, before I knew what had been removed, then everything would shift quietly, legally, irreversibly, and I would never even know what I had lost. I leaned back in my chair, letting that realization settle. Because now the plan wasn't abstract anymore. It was clear, and clarity does something powerful. It removes doubt. The next morning, Rachel called. I've started tracing the inquiry records, she said. It'll take a little time, but we're already seeing a pattern. My pulse quickened slightly. What kind of pattern? The inquiries were made through an intermediary, she explained. Someone who knew how to avoid direct association, but not perfectly. And she paused. I'm not ready to name anyone yet, she said carefully. But I can tell you this, whoever initiated those inquiries had access to personal information that wouldn't be publicly available. I didn't need her to say more. That narrowed the circle significantly. All right, I said. In the meantime, she continued. I'd like you to do something. What if they present you with any documents, anything at all, do not sign? Not even as a placeholder. Not even under pressure. I won't, I said. I believe you, she replied. But situations like this can escalate quickly. They may shift tactics. I thought of Chloe's voice, smooth, controlled, persistent. Yes, I said quietly. I think they will. Rachel's tone softened slightly. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing," she said. "Stay steady." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment letting the silence return, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt grounded, because whatever was coming next, I wasn't walking into it unprepared, and Chloe, she might still think this was a game she could control, but she was about to find out something she hadn't considered. I don't play games. I end them. The shift didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, small confirmations that slowly removed any remaining doubt I might have been holding on to. 3 days after my meeting with Rachel, she called again, this time earlier than expected. "Annie," she said, her voice more focused than before, "I need you to sit down for a moment." I was already seated at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun to unfold. "I'm listening," I said. "We've traced the inquiry pattern," she continued. "Not completely, but enough to establish direction." My fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table, and I asked. "There's a connection," she said, "indirect but consistent. The intermediary firm that submitted the inquiries has ties to a consulting group based out of Atlanta." "That doesn't mean anything on its own," I said carefully. "No," she agreed, "but the consultant assigned to that group has a surname that should sound familiar to you." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. "Chloe," she said. The word didn't hit like a shock. It landed like confirmation. Heavy, final. She didn't submit anything directly, Rachel continued. She was careful. "But the chain is there, and more importantly, the timing matches your description perfectly. The brunch, the invitation, the pressure. It all aligned." "And Michael?" I asked quietly. Rachel paused. "We haven't found direct evidence linking him to the inquiry itself," she said. "But Annie, it would be very difficult for someone to access this level of information without cooperation from someone inside your immediate circle. Inside. Not outside. Not distant. Close." I closed my eyes briefly, because this was the part I had been holding back from fully accepting. Not Chloe. I had seen her clearly for a long time. But Michael, my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had trusted, he didn't have to start it, I said slowly. "No," Rachel replied, "but he knew." Another pause. "Yes," she said. The words settled into something deep inside me, not as anger, not even as betrayal, but as clarity. Because sometimes the most painful truth isn't what someone does. It's what they allow. "What else?" I asked. Rachel exhaled softly. "There's more," she said. "The investment itself, we've confirmed its current valuation." I braced myself. How much, I asked. "It's not just liquid capital," she explained. "It's tied to commercial real estate holdings, shared ownership across multiple properties." I swallowed. "And the value?" She didn't hesitate. "Just over $6 million. The number didn't feel real at first, not because of what it meant financially, but because of what it explained. Everything. The urgency, the manipulation, the timing. Annie, Rachel said gently, "This isn't something someone stumbles across casually. This is the kind of asset people plan around." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I can see that now. And there's something else," she added. I waited. The missing page, we've identified what it likely contained. My attention sharpened immediately. "What primary controlling authority," she said, "and a clause that specifies transfer conditions upon the death of the original partner, your husband." My breath caught, and I asked. She didn't soften it. "You." The word landed quietly, but it carried everything. You are the sole controlling authority on that investment, she continued. Not partial, not shared, full authority. I leaned back in my chair, the air in the room feeling suddenly still. Full authority, not something to be divided, not something to be managed. Mine. And that missing page. That's what they needed, I said. Yes, Rachel replied. Without that page, the structure looks ambiguous. It creates just enough uncertainty that someone could try to position themselves as a necessary intermediary. And then they gain influence, she said. Possibly even control depending on what you sign. I nodded slowly, because now the entire plan was visible. Chloe didn't need to steal the asset outright. She just needed to insert herself into it, to make me feel dependent, confused, grateful for guidance. And then step by step shift the balance. I have a question, I said. Go ahead. If I hadn't gone to that brunch, if Tony hadn't recognized me, what would have happened? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Then, you likely would have signed something, she said. Something that seemed routine. Something framed as assistance. And then she continued, it would have been very difficult to reverse. I let that sink in. Not dramatic, not explosive. Quiet, legal, permanent. And I would have never known. That was the part that stayed with me, not the money, the silence, the way it would have disappeared without a single confrontation. I want to move forward, I said finally. Rachel's tone shifted slightly. Good, she said. Because we're ready. What does that look like? A controlled confrontation, she replied. On your terms, with documentation, with legal backing. I thought about Chloe, about the way she smiled when she thought she was in control, about the way she spoke to me at that table. Trash. The word echoed again, not as a wound this time, as a marker, a reminder of exactly what she believed, and exactly what she didn't understand when I asked. Soon Rachel said, before they realize what you know. I nodded. Yes, I said. I think that's important. After we hung up, I sat there for a long moment. The house was quiet again, but not empty, not uncertain, clear. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street I had lived on for years. Nothing had changed out there, but everything had changed in here, because now there was no question left, no doubt, no confusion. Chloe hadn't just insulted me, she had built a plan around underestimating me. And Michael, he had stood beside her long enough to let it take shape. But what neither of them had considered, what neither of them had prepared for, was this moment. The moment where I saw everything clearly and chose not to stay silent, because whatever they thought they were taking from me, they were about to lose something far more valuable. Control. Rachel and I didn't rush. That was the first thing she insisted on. Speed creates mistakes, she told me the afternoon we met again in her office. Precision creates outcomes. So we chose precision. The plan wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't built on emotion. It was built on timing and truth. They're expecting you to either hesitate or come to them, Rachel said, sliding a folder across her desk toward me. So we do neither. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the documents, annotations, timelines, and a clean reconstruction of the missing page based on legal records Rachel had accessed. Everything was laid out clearly. Order, structure, proof. Where I asked. Rachel leaned back slightly. Somewhere neutral but familiar to them, she said. Somewhere they'll feel comfortable enough to underestimate the situation. I already knew the answer. Tony's restaurant, I said. She nodded. It's ideal. Public enough to prevent escalation. Private enough to control the conversation. And Tony, I asked. He's agreed to be present if needed, she said. Not as a participant, but as a witness. I closed the folder slowly. Everything was in place. All that's left, Rachel added, is how you want to handle it emotionally. I looked up. What do you mean? You have two choices, she said. You can confront them with anger or with clarity. I didn't hesitate. Clarity. Rachel gave a small nod. Good, she said, because clarity is harder to fight. The message I sent to Michael that evening was simple. Let's meet for lunch tomorrow, just the three of us. There are things we need to talk about. He replied within minutes. Of course. Where I named the restaurant. There was a slight delay before his next message came through. Okay. No questions. No hesitation. That told me everything I needed to know. Chloe would be there. The next day I arrived early. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to settle into the space before they did. Tony greeted me quietly, no dramatics this time. Just a brief nod, a steady look. You ready? He asked. Yes, I said. Rachel arrived shortly after, composed as always, carrying a slim portfolio. We didn't sit together at first. That was part of the plan. When Michael and Chloe walked in, I was already seated at the table, alone, waiting. Chloe saw me first. Her smile came instantly bright, confident, controlled. But it faltered for just a fraction of a second when she noticed something different. I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't shrinking. I was still. And people like Chloe notice stillness because it doesn't give them anything to work with. Annie, she said warmly as they approached. This is nice. Michael nodded. Mom? I gestured to the seats across from me. Sit, I said. No small talk, no soft entry, just direction. That was the first shift. They sat. Menus were handed out, but no one opened them. I won't take much of your time, I said calmly. Chloe tilted her head slightly. You sound serious, she said lightly. I am. Michael shifted in his seat. What's going on? He asked. I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table between us. That was the second shift. Objects change conversations. What's this? Chloe asked. Information, I said. She smiled faintly. She smiled. We already talked about going through documents together. I know I interrupted gently. That's why I brought someone who understands them better than I do. That's when Rachel stepped forward. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just present. Good afternoon, she said, taking the seat beside me. Michael froze. Chloe didn't. Not outwardly, but I saw it. The tightening around her eyes. Who is this? Chloe asked. My attorney, I said. There it was. The moment. The one Chloe hadn't planned for. Rachel opened the folder calmly. We've reviewed the investment documents associated with Mr. Thomas Webb, she said, and we'd like to clarify a few things. Michael leaned forward. Mom, you didn't need to. I did, I said. He stopped, because something in my voice had changed. Not louder, not harsher, just final. Rachel continued. There have been recent inquiries made into this investment, she said, through an intermediary firm connected to a consulting group in Atlanta. Chloe didn't move, but she didn't interrupt either. That consulting group Rachel added has a direct association with your family name. Silence. Clean. Sharp. Unavoidable. Michael looked at Chloe. Chloe smiled. Softly. Controlled. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, she said. Rachel didn't react. Chill. We also identified a missing page in the document set, she continued. Specifically the page outlining controlling authority. Chloe's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Barely noticeable. But it was there. And after reconstructing the full document, Rachel said, sliding a paper forward, we can confirm that Annie Webb holds sole controlling authority over the entire investment. That was the third shift. Truth changes posture. Michael leaned back. Chloe didn't smile anymore. She studied the paper. Carefully, as if looking for a flaw. There wasn't one. That's interesting, she said finally. Is it? I asked. Our eyes met. And for the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. Rachel spoke again. We're also aware that efforts were made to position influence over this asset through informal guidance and document review. Chloe exhaled softly. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled. But this time, it wasn't polite, it wasn't controlled, it was something else, something sharper. Well, she said, if we're being completely honest. Michael turned to her. Chloe. No, she said, cutting him off. Let's stop pretending. There it was, the mask slipping. You think I didn't see it? She continued, looking directly at me now. All that money just sitting there? Untouched, unmanaged. I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to. She kept going. Someone had to do something with it, she said. You weren't exactly going to handle it yourself. The room felt still. Not tense. Not chaotic. Just exposed. Michael looked at her again, this time differently. Chloe, he said quietly. That's not... You knew, she said, turning to him. And just like that, everything shifted again. For a moment, no one spoke. Not me, not Rachel, not even Michael. Because once Chloe said those two words, you knew the conversation stopped being about documents. It became about truth. Michael's face changed first. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone across the room would have noticed. But I saw it. The tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders pulled slightly inward as if something inside him had just been exposed to the light. Chloe, he said again, quieter this time. That's exactly how it is. She cut in, her voice sharper now, less polished. Don't act like you didn't see the same thing I did. I watched him closely, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the confrontation, not the evidence. This, the point where he would have to choose between silence and honesty. I saw documents, he said carefully. That's all. Chloe laughed. A short, dry sound. You saw more than that, she said. You knew there was value. You knew it was sitting there unclaimed, unmanaged. It wasn't ours, he said. The words came out quickly, too quickly, as if he needed to get them out before something else took their place. Chloe turned to him fully now, her expression tightening. It was going to be, she said. There it was. No more layers, no more careful language. Just intention. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. Because whatever doubt I had been holding on to about Michael's role in this was gone. He might not have built the plan, but he had stood close enough to it to know what it was. And he had stayed. Rachel remained still beside me, her presence steady, grounded. She didn't need to speak. Not yet. Because the truth was unfolding on its own. You can't just say that, Michael said, his voice tightening. You can't just... Why not? Chloe shot back. It's the truth. Her eyes flicked toward me. Or are we still pretending she didn't need help managing something like that? There it was again. That same tone, the same belief. That I was something less, something incapable. I met her gaze calmly. I didn't need your help, I said. She smiled slightly. You needed someone, she replied. Not you. The words landed cleanly. No emotion. No hesitation. Just truth. For a brief second, something flickered across her face. Not shock. Not guilt. Something closer to irritation. Because I hadn't reacted the way she expected. Michael leaned forward, his hands pressed flat against the table. This isn't right, he said. We weren't trying to take anything. We were just trying to position ourselves, Rachel said quietly. The room stilled again. Her voice hadn't been loud, but it carried. Michael looked at her, then back at me. That's not... It is, Rachel said calmly. The inquiry records, the missing documentation, the timing of your outreach. It all aligns. Chloe let out a slow breath, then leaned back in her chair again. You're making it sound worse than it is, she said. Rachel didn't react. I'm describing it accurately, she replied. Chloe's smile returned, but thinner now. Let's be honest, she said, turning back to me. You weren't going to do anything with that investment. It would have just sat there, and that gave you the right I asked. Her eyes held mine. It gave me the opportunity, she said. The honesty was almost impressive. Almost. Michael looked at her again, this time with something else in his expression. Not agreement, not confusion. Something heavier. You said we were helping, he said. I said we were handling it, she replied. That's not the same thing. She didn't answer. Because it wasn't. And he knew it now. Tony stepped forward, then not to interrupt, but to anchor the moment. You don't get to decide what someone else deserves, he said calmly, his voice steady. Chloe glanced at him, her expression tightening again. This isn't your business, she said. It became my business when you tried to use my restaurant as your stage, he replied. The words hung in the air, sharp, measured. True. Chloe exhaled again, slower this time. Then she looked at me, really looked, and for the first time since this began, she didn't see someone she could control. She saw someone she had misjudged. You've changed, she said. I shook my head slightly. No, I replied. I stopped pretending. Silence followed. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was settled. Michael sat back in his chair, his gaze dropping briefly before lifting again. When he looked at me, something had shifted. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. I should have told you, he said. The words were quiet, but they mattered. Yes, I said. I didn't think I know. I interrupted gently. He stopped. Because he did know. That was the problem. He had known enough, just not enough to stop it. I'm sorry, he said. I believed him, but belief doesn't erase action, and it doesn't rebuild trust. Rachel closed the folder calmly, signaling the end of the legal part of the conversation. The asset is now fully secured under Annie's control, she said. Any further attempts to access or influence it will be documented and addressed accordingly. Chloe didn't argue. She didn't need to.
Because she had already lost not just the asset, the position, the control, the narrative. Everything she had built around the assumption that I wouldn't fight back was gone. She stood up slowly. "This was unnecessary," she said. "No," I replied. "It was overdue." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to Michael. "Are you coming?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, everything became clear. Because for the first time, he wasn't following her. Not automatically. Not without thought. "I'll come later," he said. Chloe stared at him for a second. Then she nodded once. Short. Sharp. And walked away. Just like that. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement, because people like her don't apologize when they lose. They reposition. Michael stayed seated. The room felt quieter now. Lighter. But not resolved. Not yet. He looked at me again. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "Good," I replied. He blinked slightly, because that wasn't what he expected. "Forgiveness isn't the same as trust," I continued. "And trust isn't something you get back because you ask for it." He nodded slowly. "I understand." I studied him for a moment. The boy I had raised. The man he had become. And the space between those two things. "We'll see," I said. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't acceptance. It was truth. And for now, that was enough. After Chloe walked out, the restaurant seemed to breathe again. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet release. Tony stepped back, giving us space without leaving entirely. Rachel gathered her papers but didn't rush. She understood what this moment was: not legal, not strategic, personal, and unresolved. Michael remained seated across from me, his hands resting loosely on the table, now no longer braced, no longer defensive, but not steady either, just uncertain. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said after a while. His voice was softer than I had heard it in years. I tilted my head slightly. "How far did you think it would go?" I asked. He hesitated, then gave a small, almost helpless shrug. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought maybe we'd help you organize things, make decisions easier, keep everything managed. Managed." The words sounded different coming from him, less calculated, more borrowed. Whose idea was it, I asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. "Michael," I said gently, "I'm not asking to trap you. I'm asking because I need to understand." He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "It started with her," he said finally. She noticed something in the paperwork. She started asking questions. "And you?" I asked. I told her it was probably nothing he said. At first. I let that sit. But then I pressed. He looked down at the table again. "She kept digging," he said. "She found connections, old records. And then she showed me what it could be worth." There it was. The turning point. Value. Not sentiment. Not responsibility. Value. "And that changed things," I said. He nodded just once. "I didn't think we were doing anything wrong," he said quickly. "I thought if we helped guide it, if we made the right decisions, it would benefit everyone." Everyone. I almost smiled. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" I asked. That question landed differently. He looked up this time, his expression tightening. I don't know," he said. That was the most honest answer he had given all day. and somehow it hurt more than anything else, because it meant the truth wasn't part of the plan. It was optional. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "I trusted you," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I didn't just trust you with documents," I continued. "I trusted you to look out for me." He didn't respond, because there was nothing he could say to that. Rachel stood then, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. "I'll give you both a moment," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." She stepped away, moving toward the front of the restaurant with quiet professionalism, leaving us alone in a space that suddenly felt much more honest. Tony remained nearby, but distant enough not to intrude. Michael looked at me again. "I didn't think of it like that," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." He swallowed, his gaze dropping briefly before lifting again. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was the hardest part. Because harm doesn't always come from intention. Sometimes it comes from absence, from not stepping in when you should, from letting something unfold because it feels easier than stopping it. "I let her take the lead," he said quietly. "I thought she understood things better than I did." "Financially?" I asked. "Yes." "And morally," I added. That made him pause. Longer this time. "I didn't think about it that way," he admitted. I nodded slowly, because that more than anything explained it. He hadn't thought about it. Not deeply enough. Not carefully enough. And that lack of thought had created space for something else to take over. Something sharper. More calculated. "Chloe, I'm not going to punish you," I said after a moment. He looked up surprised. "I'm not interested in that," I continued, "but I'm also not going to pretend this didn't happen. I wouldn't expect you to," he said. "Good." Silence settled between us again. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. "I've secured the investment," I added. "Legally, completely. There won't be any further discussion about transferring control." He nodded. "I understand." "And Chloe?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know," he said. "I need to figure that out." That answer didn't surprise me, because this wasn't just about money. It was about who he had chosen to become, and whether he was willing to see that clearly. "You'll have to decide what matters more," I said. He looked at me. "Which is control," I replied, "or integrity." The words stayed in the air between us. Not as a challenge, as a truth. Because you can't hold both in the same way. Not when one is built on taking from someone else. He nodded slowly. "I hear you," he said. I stood then, smoothing the front of my dress. For a moment I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I needed to say, and I wanted to say it clearly. "I'm willing to have a relationship with you," I said. His expression shifted slightly, hope maybe. "But it won't look the same," I added. That hope faltered, and that was important. "Trust isn't automatic anymore," I continued. "It's something you'll have to rebuild. Over time. With actions, not words." He nodded again. "I understand." "And if you don't," I said gently, "that's something you'll have to live with." He looked down at the table, absorbing that, then back at me. "I don't want to lose you," he said. The words were quiet, honest, and late. "You didn't lose me," I replied. "Not completely." He held on to that. I could see it, like a lifeline, but I didn't soften the rest. "Just don't make me question it again," I said, because that was the line. Not anger,
not punishment. Clarity. He nodded. I won't. I believed that he meant it, but belief, I had learned, is only the beginning, not the proof. I picked up my purse and turned toward the door. Tony stepped forward as I approached, his expression steady. You all right? He asked. I paused, then nodded. Yes, I said. And for the first time in a long time, that word felt true. Not because everything was fixed, not because everything was resolved, but because I had done something I hadn't done in years. I had chosen myself, and that changes everything. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly become easier, but it became clearer. And clarity, I've learned, is its own kind of peace. At first there was silence. Not the empty kind I had grown used to over the years, but a different kind, intentional, measured. Michael didn't call every day. He didn't show up unannounced. And for once, I didn't reach out to fill the space between us. We both needed time. Time to sit with what had been said, what had been revealed, what had been broken. Rachel continued handling the legal side with quiet efficiency. The investment was fully secured under my name, every document reviewed, every access point sealed. She even arranged for additional oversight just in case anyone tried to circle back later. They usually don't, she told me during one of our follow-up meetings. Once something like this becomes documented and visible, most people move on. Most people. I knew Chloe wouldn't be one of them. Not immediately. People like her don't let go easily. They reposition. But that was no longer my concern, because for the first time she didn't have access. Not to the investment, not to the narrative, and most importantly, not to me. I hadn't seen her since the day at the restaurant, not in person. But I had heard things, small things, friends of friends mentioning tension, a quiet separation, then something more official. Michael came by one afternoon about 3 weeks after everything had happened. He didn't call first. He just knocked. I opened the door and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not in weakness but in uncertainty. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into the house slowly, as if it felt different to him now. Maybe it did. Maybe it always had. We sat in the living room on opposite ends of the couch at first. Not distant. Just careful. "How are you?" he asked. "Steady," I said. He nodded. "I've been thinking a lot," he added. "I hoped you would." A small pause. Then he looked at me. "Chloe and I are separating," he said. I didn't react immediately. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wanted to understand what he meant. Not just the words, but the weight behind them. "For good?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes." Silence settled between us again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was honest. "I'm not asking you to feel anything about that," he said. "I just thought you should know." "I appreciate that," I replied. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I didn't realize how far things had gone," he said. "Not until it was all laid out like that." I studied him for a moment. "You realized?" I said gently. "You just didn't stop it." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." Another pause. "Then I'm trying to do better," he said. The words were simple, but they mattered. "Good," I replied, because trying is where it starts. Not apologies, not promises, trying. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. We didn't rebuild years of distance in a single conversation, but something shifted. Not back to what it was before, something new, more honest, more aware. And that was enough for now. A month later, I returned to Tony's restaurant. Not for confrontation, not for answers, just for lunch. He saw me as soon as I walked in, his expression softening in that familiar way. "Annie girl," he said, smiling. I smiled back. "Tony." He led me to a table near the window. We talked. Not about the past in heavy detail, not about what might have been, but about what was. His restaurant, my plans, the way life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. "You always had more strength than you gave yourself credit for," he said at one point. I shook my head slightly. "No," I replied. "I just forgot for a while." He nodded. "That happens." We sat in comfortable silence after that. Not empty, just full. With Rachel's help, I made a decision about the investment. Not a reactive one, not emotional, intentional. I established a fund in Thomas's name. A portion of the income would go towards supporting older women facing financial manipulation, women who had been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside by the very people they trusted. Rachel helped structure it properly, legally sound, transparent, protected. "It's a good use of it," she said. "It's the right use," I replied, "because money on its own doesn't mean much. But what you choose to do with it, that's where the meaning lives." Michael continued to show up. Not perfectly, but consistently. A call here, a visit there. Small things, real things. He didn't try to force closeness. He didn't expect forgiveness to erase everything. He just stayed. And slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something. Not what we had before, something stronger, because it was built with open eyes. As for Chloe, I heard she moved back to Atlanta, that she started over, that she told her own version of the story. I didn't follow it. I didn't need to, because some people don't change. They just move to a place where their story makes more sense. And that's all right. Not everyone is meant to stay in your life. Some people are there to reveal something, to test something, to show you exactly where your boundaries need to be. And once they've done that, their role is complete. Sometimes I think back to that moment at the brunch table, the word she used, trash. It doesn't sting the way it did before. Not anymore, because now I understand something she didn't. People don't define your worth by what they call you. They reveal their own. And in that moment, she told me everything I needed to know, not about me, about her. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not ignorance. And kindness is not permission to be diminished. There is strength in standing still, in observing, in waiting until you understand the full shape of what's happening around you, and then choosing your moment, choosing your voice, choosing yourself, because dignity doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from finally seeing yourself clearly and refusing to be anything less than that. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small by someone who thought they knew your worth, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Do you think Michael deserves a second chance? And what would you have done in my place? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we finally decide to tell.